Let's face it, cinematic universes are a dime a dozen. For proof, look at how many studios are developing them. Disney has Marvel and Star Wars, Warner Brothers has the DC Cinematic Universe, the Lego Universe, and had high hopes for King Arthur, which was supposed to kick off a series of 6 films. Paramount has continuously developed Transformers, Fox has the X-Men, and Universal has the Dark Universe. And these are just a few that currently exist. Today I want to talk about the Dark Universe and the recent release of director Alex Kurtzman's The Mummy. Kurtzman is not only the director of this horror-adventure hybrid, he is the producer behind the Dark Universe, which features Universal Studios' most well-known monsters, including The Mummy, Frankenstein's Monster, The Invisible Man, The Creature from the Black Lagoon, Dracula, and The Wolfman, among others. We know this information because Universal released a photo of actors who will be taking on some of the iconic roles. They announced a series of potential films that will follow The Mummy, and premiered a brief trailer that calls back to Universal movie monsters of yesteryear. Understand this, my plan is not to review The Mummy months after its release date. Instead, what I'm going to do is analyze the choice to make this film to kick off a cinematic universe. It's fair to say that I think it was a mistake. First, let's take a look at still relatively fresh in the mind Universal monster movies. On May 7, 1999, Universal released The Mummy, starring Brendan Fraser. The film reportedly had a production budget of $80 million, or $117 million in 2017, and went on to gross $155 million domestically and $260 million internationally. That's not bad. It was a tidy bit of profit for the studio, and the film finished as the number 8 top-grossing movie for the year, behind Big Daddy and Disney's Tarzan. 2 years later, Universal released The Mummy Returns, with a production budget of $98 million, or $135 million today. This film went on to gross $202 million domestically and $230 million internationally, and finished in 6th place for the year, behind Rush Hour 2. Again, not bad at all. It wasn't until 7 years later, though, that Universal released the third Mummy film, The Mummy, Tomb of the Dragon Emperor. This film grossed $401 million worldwide, but finished 25th for the year domestically, behind Bedtime Stories and Tropic Thunder, with a gross of $102 million. That's a $100 million drop from The Mummy Returns. Luckily, international audiences showed up, and the film made $298 million, a $58 million increase from the previous film. This film, like the others, picked up a consistent $400 million pot, despite domestic sales. Overall, it was lower than the other outings, but still respectable. However, the budgeting problems become abundantly clear when you lay out the numbers for the Mummy franchise. The Mummy cost $80 million to make. The Mummy Returns cost $98 million to make. And The Mummy Tomb of the Dragon Emperor cost $145 million, or $162 million today. And these numbers don't include ever-increasing marketing and distribution costs. The budgets kept rising, but the box office numbers started to dwindle. Now mind you, this was 7 years after the last sequel, so Tomb of the Dragon Emperor did quite well considering. Based on these numbers, I'm sure it made sense to reinvent the franchise in 2017, with a big blockbuster release. But the story doesn't end with The Mummy Tomb of the Dragon Emperor. In fact, it's only just beginning. And soon enough, the fundamental flaw in sinking so much money into this dark universe becomes abundantly clear. Flash forward to February 12, 2010. The Wolfman, starring Benicio del Toro, is released by Universal Studios. The production budget is a whopping $150 million, or nearly $170 million in 2017. The film goes on to gross a worldwide total of $139 million. It's an obvious flop, because it doesn't come anywhere close to the first Mummy film, and fails to make back its budget. Now jump 4 years later into 2014. Dracula Untold is Universal's latest release to attempt to regain that Universal monster movie glory. The studio has set a more modest budget with $70 million. The film goes on to collect its budget, and then some, with a worldwide gross of $217 million. Still, this is nowhere near The Mummy's original gross, but it's respectable because the studio kept production costs down. Unfortunately, Universal Studios learned the wrong lesson from this outing. Rather than seeing that the low production cost meant more potential for profit, they saw Dracula Untold as an uptick in interest in the Universal monster catalog. So their logic told them, return to the film series that worked best for us, The Mummy. That logic to me is sound. However, their choice to sink $195 million into the production and $150 million into distribution and advertising was wildly misguided. The film has gone on to make $390 million. That would be considered a hit if so much money wasn't put into production, advertising, and distribution. Because when all that cost is counted, the film only made $45 million for the studio. Ironically, Universal does know how to produce, market, and release horror films. They did it already this year. Twice. Universal's Split reportedly cost $9 million to make, and The Hollywood Reporter asserts that average movie marketing costs are nearing $40 million. So let's say Split was marketed with $40 million. It could be lower, it could be higher. With those numbers in mind, Split made $227 million for Universal. But Split wasn't the only big horror film for the studio. Get Out was also released by Universal and reportedly cost $4.5 to $5 million to make. Adding on another $40 million marketing budget, that film brought in $207 million. Together, these low-budget horror/psychological thrillers brought the studio $427 million or $382 million more than The Mummy. The message is clear. If Universal can keep costs down, then it has the potential to clean up at the box office. The Dark Universe doesn't have to strive to be an action-adventure franchise similar to the Marvel Cinematic Universe. It could easily have a lock on the horror market by making engaging, terrifying, and psychologically complex films similar to Split or Get Out. But if the studio continues to develop big-budget films on the same scale as The Mummy, then they are destined for failure.